That's why. So our scripture reading this week was the book of Ezra, and we start out in chapter 1. So who prophesied that Cyrus, king of Persia, would let Judah return 100 years before this happens? Prophesied, but you have to look in the...
Jeremiah.
I had Isaiah.
You had Isaiah?
Yeah, I used Isaiah 44:28.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I am almost certain. Okay. Jeremiah 29.
If I was Jeremiah...
But he says Isaiah in the text. It says Isaiah in the text?
No, you have to kind of look in
Oh, okay.
the index.
I got you.
I find out where it came from. So this is a bonus question. I think nobody gets right. It's not a challenging one. So who do you think possibly could have showed Cyrus or had influence on Cyrus to predict Isaiah's prophecy which stated that they would return to Jerusalem? You have to go back and think, all right, who was close to Cyrus and had influence on him? It's a book.
Nehemiah was the cupbearer.
Daniel. I was thinking of Daniel. But it could have been Nehemiah, too. I think
Yeah, but
Nehemiah was cupbearer.
Nehemiah was the cupbearer for Artaxerxes and that.
Yeah, I think Nehemiah was much later, though.
So, I don't know if he
But
was.
Daniel was up there pretty close to Cyrus at the time when all this was happening. So it doesn't say that anywhere in the Bible. That's my speculation, that maybe Daniel might have had some influence on Cyrus. Maybe not. Maybe it was all God's doing here, which is possible, too. So, but anyway. What else was returned to Jerusalem besides people in verse 7?
All the things that was out of the temple.
Yeah, articles of the temple, also silver, gold, livestock. So we get to chapter 2, and it lists all those that we returned. Verse 64 tells us how many that was, which was how many? Yeah, 42,360 people. Chapter 3, when the foundation was laid, what did the people do? It was mixed. The older people and the priests and Levites did something, and the younger people did something. Verse 12.
They will.
Yeah, the older people wept, right? And the Levites and the priests. Why would they wept? What did they experience before this temple? Solomon's temple, right? How grander and beautiful it was. And here this temple that they put the foundation in is a lot smaller. What did the younger people do?
They cheered.
Yeah, cheered. Hey, we get the temple. Right? They were happy about it. Chapter 4, who wanted to help in rebuilding the temple? Verse 1, chapter 4.
The ones that wanted to help was the ones that wanted to stop it.
Right, yeah. I think they got a little jealous because they wouldn't let them help them. That was the mixed marriages, the Samaritans, Judah's adversaries. So what did they do to stop the building of the temple?
Repeat that?
What did they do? What did these adversaries do to stop them from building the temple?
They kept sending false messages to the king.
Yeah.
And they forced them by arms. They came up with military aid evidently and forced them to stop. Forced them, that's the quote unquote.
Yeah, but anyway, they sent letters to King Artaxerxes, and so what did the letter basically say?
that if they got the temple and the walls built, that they would be rebellious.
Right, they wouldn't be paid taxes, they'd be rebelled against the king and stuff. So what was the king's response here in verse 21 and verse 24? In chapter 4. Yeah, stop work. The one doing the work. So we get to chapter 5. Who gets it back to work again on the temple in verse 1? A couple of prophets.
Haggai and Zechariah.
Yeah, that guy's Zechariah. So there's another letter sent to king at the time, which is Darius. What does he do in verse 17? On chapter 5.
Well, he makes a search to see if there ever was such a decree by Cyrus.
Right. So he finds the decree. What was the result in verse 6 of chapter 6?
That it would be, basically.
Yeah, let it go on. Let him complete it. Give him on. So chapter 7, who returns with the second group about 80 years after the first group returned? Folks named after them.
Ezra.
Ezra, yeah. Verse 1, chapter 7. Chapter 8 talks about what they received from God's temple and who was with them in the returning. Chapter 9 and 10, what does Israel realize about the people's marriages?
They were with people of other races.
Right, right. They had mixed marriages. So what does he do?
He says that they've got to put them away.
Yeah, he tears his clothes, praises God, tells the people that they have to put him away. And what do the people end up doing?
We have record of those that listened, but we don't really know how many may not have listened.
Right, yeah, so they do. They put their wives and children away. Verse 10 is a list of those that had pagan wives. So we start in Nehemiah Monday, and we'll finish up in Nehemiah actually 4 weeks tonight. So, actually, I think Ezra and Nehemiah kind of go together anyway, so it'll be good. Good. Okay, so today we're doing the parable of the 10 virgins, lesson 24. And then Wednesday, we're going to go back and do lesson 23. Okay, so we're skipping lesson 23 right now, but we're going to go back on some and catch up on it. So to start off with, let's just talk about a typical wedding at this time. So what happens at a typical wedding? I think this is important that we understand this. So we really understand the parable. So usually the bridegroom goes in person to bring the bride to her own home, to her new home, where most of the time this was where the wedding occurs, is at her new home, which would be the bridegroom's home, or it could have been the parents' home, and a lot of times they would live like on the roof until they found another home. Before leaving, she would receive the blessing of her relatives. And we got an example of that in Genesis 24:60. Rebekah's relatives sent her away with a typical blessing here. It's stated there, "Thou art our sister, be thou the mother of thousands of millions, and let thy seed possess the gate of those which hate them." So that was the blessing that she got in 24:60. That was Rebekah's blessing that she got before she went and got married. So that was a typical thing. The bride attire, her hair was often braided with precious stones and jewels. And those jewels and precious stones would be what the family had. And if they didn't have any, she would borrow some from her friends and relatives. Most likely her face was veiled. Turn to Ezekiel, somebody can turn to Ezekiel 16. I read verses 11 and 12 here. Kind of gives you a description of what a typical bride would look like.
What verse is mine?
16 verses 11 and 12.
And I adorned you with ornaments, and put bracelets on your wrist, and a chain on your neck. And I put a ring on your nose, and earrings in your ears, and a beautiful crown on your head.
Okay, so that was a typical, what a typical bride would look like. Crown on her head, lots of jewels on her. She would look like a queen. So the wedding procession, it started at the bride's house, and went to where they would live or have the wedding. Wedding where they would live is probably pretty much the same place. Sometimes they would leave with his parents. They would live with his parents on the roof. The streets were dark, so they didn't have any electricity back then, right? So how would they light up the procession and where they were going?
Have some kind of fire lamp,
Yeah,
something like
yeah.
that.
Yeah, and if you didn't have a lamp, or what we get from this parable, if you didn't have a lamp, you were not able to enter the house, were you? There's much dancing, probably musical instruments or drums in the procession to the bride's house. After arriving at the wedding, the older woman a lot of times would have the task of rearranging the bride's hair. What I read here was that her face would not be unveiled in public as long as she was married. So in other words, every time she would go out in public, she would have this veil on her head for the rest of her life, I guess. So the one doing the ceremony would be one of the fathers or an important person who might be present there. Was the changing of the vows, probably not a religious ceremony at all at this time. All the guests were required to wear a wedding garment, as we read in the parable of the wedding in Matthew 22, verse 12. We had told in Judges 14:17 that the wedding the wedding ceremony and with the relatives and friends could last up to a week or more. So it wasn't just something that was over in a couple hours, it was a long time. The festivities went on for a long time. Any questions about the wedding?
No, Marty, I was wondering, he makes a point in the book that we shouldn't make details at every point of the parable. And I think the idea that, even if you don't have lamps, it's like you can still go places by the light of the moon. And they even went and bought lamps. They even bought oil for their lamps.
Yeah.
So it's almost like that part of it is constructed in order to make the point that they weren't ready, not really to represent maybe reality. Maybe there is a reality or something that I'm not seeing there with the lamp. Because it's like, did you have to have a lamp in order to be allowed inside? Like there's kind of that question. But it seems like Jesus to me, is constructing the background a little bit in order to make the point that he's making. So that's just something that puzzled me a little bit.
Yeah, I figured, well, these 5 wise virgins that had enough oil, I get enough oil, but again,
Yeah,
it doesn't make the point if we said that, well, that was enough, they didn't have to worry about the other.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so let's read the parable here, Matthew 25, 1 through 13. Put your Bibles up in Matthew 25. So I'm going to go ahead and read this. And the kingdom of heaven shall be likened to 10 virgins who took their lamps and went out to meet the bridegroom. Now 5 of them were wise, and 5 were foolish. Those who were foolish took their lamps and took no oil with them. But the wise took oil in the vessels with their lamps. But while the bridegroom was delayed, they all slumbered and slept. And at midnight a cry was heard, Behold, the bridegroom is coming. Go out and meet him. Then all those virgins arose and trimmed their lamps. And the foolish said to the wise, Give us some of your oil, for our lamps are going out. But the wise answered, saying, No, thus we should not be enough for us and you, but go rather to those who sell and buy for yourselves. And while they went to buy, the bridegroom came, and those who were ready went in with him to the wedding, and the door was shut. Afterwards, the other virgins came also, saying, Lord, Lord, open to us. And he answered and said, Surely I say to you, I do not know you. Watch therefore, for you know neither the day nor the hour in which the Son of Man is coming. Okay, so start with, I guess we need to answer, well, who is the bridegroom here? Who is it representing?
Christ.
Christ, right? Yeah, let's look at a couple of passages here. Somebody turn to John 14, 1 through 3. What do we see here in these verses? Let's read that before it gets there.
Do not let your heart be troubled. Believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house are many dwelling places. If it were not so, I would have told you. For I go to prepare a place for you. If I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you to myself, that where I am, there you may be also.
Yeah, so we can see here that Christ has prepared a place for the redeemed, and that he is going to come again. Also, let's turn to Acts 1:11. So this is going to be it.
They also said, Men of Galilee, why do you stand looking into the sky? This Jesus who has been taken up from you into heaven will come in just the same way as you have watched him go into heaven.
So we know that Christ is going to come again. And we just read, and it also states that in verse 6 in this parable. So the question is, do we know when and how he will come again?
We know how, we don't know when.
What was that?
I said, we know how he's coming back, we don't know when.
Right. We know how. Verse 5 says there was a delay, right? So they weren't ready, really. They were sleeping, slumbering. So apparently it was a long delay. 2 Peter 3:19 tells us that he will come as a thief in the night. So what does that tell you?
We least suspected.
Right. Yeah. You're not going to be waiting there for a thief to come to your house, right? So it's a surprise. It's going to be a surprise. And then verse 13 of this parable, we can see that no one knows exactly when that's going to happen.
Marty, one thing, to Chris's point about we know how it will come, like in the parable, it's very clear that they knew exactly how a wedding feast was gonna go. Like they knew that they had to have their lamps, they knew that they were gonna go in, they do all these things.
They knew the route.
They just did not know that one single point of information, that when.
Yeah. Yeah. So I was thinking, okay, we got to bring this home to us. So how are some ways that we might not be ready when Jesus comes, or when our last days here on earth are done, when we die? So what are some ways that we might not be ready?
Not living faithful.
Yeah, 1 John 2, let's go ahead and turn to 1 John 2, 3:15 through 17.
Love not the world, neither the things that are in the world. If any man love the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life is not of passeth away, and the lust thereof, but he that doeth the will of God abideth forever.
Okay, so in other words, sometimes we may get involved in worldly activities, and these are, and this kind of goes along with point B here. Matthew 6:33 says, "Seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and this shall be added unto you." So if we're not seeking Christ first, it's not our priority, and we have these worldly activities that we're involved in, are we ready for Christ's second coming? I don't think we are. A couple other ones. If there's any sin in your life, if you've got skeletons in your closet that nobody knows about but you, are you ready for the second coming? No. And then I thought of some things that maybe we don't think is kind of trivial, like gossip, or helping our fellow Christians, or our neighbor. If we're not doing these things, are we being the proper example? Are we ready for a second coming? I don't know, what are y'all's thoughts on that?
Well, to the point, that's exactly what Jesus is saying at the very end. Because he tells these three parables to tell us we need to be ready. Then he paints a picture of the judgment day. And what did the king say to the sheep and the goats? What's he talking about? How some were ready and some weren't.
Right.
I was hungry. I was thirsty. You either did these things to help me or you didn't do these things. And that's the measurement that he uses, and that illustration shows who's ready.
Right.
So, that last point there is very important that you make it, I think.
Yeah, and it's trivial things that we think of. 30, 40 years ago, there was a guy, Brother Roberts, a lot of us know Brother Roberts. He came forward. Guy was never come forward in his life. He comes forward. And it's about 6 months before he passed away. He comes forward and he says, he doesn't want the preacher to make the confession. He comes up here and makes his confession. He says, "Brother, I lied. I apologize for those that I lied to. I told them that I was okay. I felt good, and I did." Now it's sounding at the church. He wanted to make sure that there was nothing. That bothered him. And he just wanted to make sure that there's nothing that's going to keep him out of heaven. And it really had an effect on me. How many times do we do that? We don't want to go in a big spill of what's wrong with us and stuff. So, yeah, I'm okay.
That's why we're told to examine ourselves and make sure that we're in the faith. Because once you take that last breath, you're in concrete, you can't change anything. Whatever shame that's brought upon you or whatever to get transparent, it's not worth missing it, not wanting to go through that.
Yeah.
It's tough, but, you gotta be real with yourself. God gave everybody a conscience.
Yeah. I mean, it just had such an effect on me that, hey, he wants to make sure there's nothing in his life that could keep him out of heaven. Not even just somebody that feel okay when he did,
Amen.
really bothered him. So, can we get to heaven on the skirt tails of others? Let's look at a few back. Galatians, this turn Galatians 6, 4 through 5. Somebody go ahead and turn to Romans 14:12 too. Go ahead and read that if you're there.
But let each one examine his own work, and then he will have rejoicing in himself alone, and not in another. For each one shall bear his own load.
All right, so we see here that we can't, get to heaven on some of these, on our families' good fortune, or our friends, or our loved ones. It's all on us. It's Romans 14:12. Go ahead.
Verse 11 says, every knee will bow to me, and every tongue shall confess to God. So then, every one of us should give an account of himself to God.
Yeah, so we're all going to give an account of ourselves to God. We're not going to be able to rest on somebody else's morals or whatever. That's important. So what are the two possibilities when our judgment day will occur? There's two possibilities, right? That
Ready
our
or
life
not?
will end. What are they?
He's gonna be shut out of the wedding feast, he's gonna be let in.
Yeah, so Christ comes again or death, right? That's our two possibilities. And when those occur, the judgment day is here, right? Christ comes or when we die. So the main point of lesson here is we must make sufficient preparation for the second coming of Christ and continue faithfully waiting for his return, or we too can be found to be foolish, just like those 5 foolish virgins. Any questions so far on the parable? I'm going pretty fast on this. Verse 10, the door will be shut. In other words, we won't have time at the end to make provisions to get into heaven, will we? We need to have it ready before that time. Be ready for it.
And that phrase, the door will be shut, it makes me think of Noah's Ark, when God shut the door, there's nobody else on the outside who will be able to get in.
Yeah, even those that were knocking at the door trying to get into the ark, it was shut. Yeah, that's exactly what's going to happen here. Now let's finish up the parable while we read Matthew 7, 21 to 23.
Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but he who does the will of my Father who is in heaven alone. And he will say to me on that day, Lord, Lord, do we not prophesy in your name, and in your name cast out demons, and in your name perform many miracles? And then I will declare to them, I never knew you. Depart from me, you who practice lawlessness.
Okay, so we got to be careful, don't we? These false teachers were prophesying, they were performing miracles and stuff. God's telling us that, hey, I didn't know you. Depart from me. Any questions?
Statement. It's always been hard for me, Marty, to read this verse and understand how anybody could take the position that it doesn't matter what we do in this life.
Yeah.
Clearly these people that were prophesying believed in God and were trying to follow his words. And I don't know. For those groups of people who believe, doesn't matter what we do in this life, once we put on Christ, we have that box check, And it doesn't matter what we do in the assembly, it doesn't matter what we do as a congregation, it doesn't matter what we do in our lives. These verses clearly sum that up, that there are going to be consequences for the way, not only the things we do in this life, but the way we serve God.
Yeah, and I think that's why it's so important that we know what the Scripture says, and that we can follow the Scriptures. We don't need to be just sitting back blindly and following what the preachers are saying up here. You know, we need to make sure that what they're saying is right with what the Word of God states. I think it's really important for us to dig into the Bible and know exactly what it
I
states.
mean, we drive in here on Sunday morning, and we pass a lot of people in buildings
Yes,
that are
it's jam-packed,
jam-packed,
yeah.
but are good people. But according to what is we have to ask ourselves. But according to what?
Yeah,
To the standard of God or to men's standards?
very good point.
It's scary. These are scary verses.
Yeah, and I think when you're trying to reach somebody that's religiously, you know, these are some verses that you can go to that maybe will force them to maybe open up the scriptures and see exactly what it says.
And obviously these people who were prophesying and casting out demons believed in God and were trying to serve Him.
Right.
What's the difference?
Yeah, I mean, look at this country. I mean, we have, what, about 500 denominations? You know,
But I take it was because they were doing it for their own glory, though. You know, casting out demons and prophesying
Yeah.
and this and that. Because they had in there, and I have no idea where, that the apostles told Jesus that, you know, these people are prophesying and stuff in your name and doing this and doing that. And, you know, like, we need to rebuke them. And he said, if they're spreading the word, though, let them be. But yet, they may not make it themselves. You know, it's kind of how I look at it with this.
yeah,
Because it was like they were spreading the word, but they were doing it wrongly. But Jesus said, let them be, because they were still getting the word spread.
good point.
So that is a little confusing to me sometimes.
Elizabeth?
I mean, just like Michael was saying, this is not a new problem. Jonathan and I have been talking, I've been pointing out to him that the high places of the Old Testament, what did they worship at the high places? And I would say that most of the time the scriptures indicate that they were trying to worship God on the high places.
Okay,
And I mean, there are many, many scriptures that will indicate that they are trying to worship God there. But we know from all of these places that God was not happy that the high places were there. And even when Sennacherib came, he said, well, Hezekiah has come and he's torn down these high places where you were worshiping God. And he said, no, you're going to worship him, or he's told you to worship him in Jerusalem. Isn't God angry with you that you're not worshiping him on all the high places anymore? You know, it's the Israelites thought they were worshiping God.
yeah,
But God was displeased with them in the way that they worshiped him because they hadn't obeyed him.
it's a very good point. Yeah.
So, I'd like to kind of go back to a point you made earlier about not getting on people's coattails, you know. I asked myself, how would somebody do that? How would that go in somebody's head? How would that thought process go? Would it be like, oh, my parents are saved, so I'm good? Or would it be something more subtle, like, you know, you have a big family at a congregation, or you have just a big family of people who are just had a reputation for being righteous, okay? And you're part of that family, and people praise that family. And people talk about, you know, people tell you you're good because you have a good name, you know.
Yeah,
And maybe we listen to that and we feel prideful. And then we kind of sit back and let ourselves coast in our spiritual walk because, well, obviously we've got good blood. We've got good blood, you know, we're good, you know. And so I think that's how that, but then, just like the wise virgins, you're caught off guard one day. You got some oil, but you ain't got nothing. and you run out.
Yeah,
Because you just and you wanted others to help get you in, but you stand by yourself before God counts you in, so.
that's a very good point, you know. I've seen that when I was younger, at a church that had, you know, the grandfather was a preacher, the grandson was a preacher, and had several children that were all faithful and stuff, and, you know, you look at that family and go, wow, you know, they're doing something right, you know, because a lot of them were Christians and stuff.
Or maybe they went to a specific religious university or something like that.
Oh, have straight fire now. That's what I'm talking about.
I mean,
Yeah, I must did.
it's just an example. You know, obviously
Yeah.
there's great benefit of surrounding yourself with Christians, but thinking that gives you a check box
Yes.
or a pedigree or something that now I've arrived. Or you hear people say, I don't know why they fell away, they went to X and X college or university, right? As if that in some shape, form, or fashion is a guard against the world or, you know, a step up. It gets me closer to heaven, right? Or the opportunity to enter in. It's just an opportunity, I think, to strengthen your faith. And I think those things are good things. I don't want to, I'm not saying that to be negative anyway, but I also think that it's something to guard yourself against in your mindset and mentality as far as your walk. It's just another step in the world as a pilgrim towards
Right.
the ultimate goal of going to heaven, and you still have to work. You don't have an advantage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I've got a few questions I got out of the book that I want to go over. Number 5 in the book says, what do these people in the parable represent? It talks about the bridegroom, bride, wise virgins, and foolish virgins. And I put down coming of the bridegroom also. So what does he represent? The bridegroom? Who's he
Christ.
represent?
Christ.
Christ. What about the bride? I think bride also represents Christ too. They both go together into the wedding feast. They both walk together to the bridegroom's house. Anybody else have any thoughts on that?
We was all saying the church,
Okay.
because the church is the bride.
Yeah, that makes sense too. Okay.
I think to your point, though, like, not every detail in the parable has to be some meaning found in it. So they kind of go together in this parable, the coming.
Yeah, I see what Chris is coming to, but
Yeah.
the scriptures look at the church as the bride.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
That makes sense too.
Yeah.
Okay. What about the wise virgins? Who they represent?
Christians that stay prepared.
Yeah, Christians that are prepared, right? And the foolish virgins are Christians that aren't prepared. What about the coming of the bride? What does that represent?
The Savior coming.
The coming of Christ, right? Why do you think the virgins had trouble being ready for the coming of the bridegroom? Sorry, my
They weren't
ears.
looking ahead, planning.
Okay, yeah. Planning,
I think it's a struggle with the concept of time.
That's right. Yeah.
Time is very dangerous, and complacency also sets in with time. And I think it's easy for us to focus as humans on a goal or something that we have that we know a definitive date to be prepared for.
yes.
So I struggle with this. I am extremely inefficient, okay? And so what I've learned over the years is I either have to, whether it's from, I want to keep myself in physical shape, I have to sign up for something.
I have to, my partner works with me very hard to be very efficient in how I try to do my calendar, right? But if I don't have that and work on that and focus on that, it allows there to be this open gap of free time. And I think that's, I think, what they struggled with. They didn't know when they were coming back. They had this time, and so therefore they were completely unprepared. And time was, they took it, they were complacent with it.
Right, they even fell asleep, you know.
Yeah.
So, all of them fell asleep, actually.
There's a verse in Matthew 24, starting at 48. It says, "But if the evil servant says in his heart, my master is delaying his coming, and begins to eat his fellow servants, and eat and drink with the drunkards, the master of the servant will come on a day that is not looking for him, at an hour we are not aware of, and will cut him in two, and appoint him to the portion of the hypocrites. And there shall be weeping and gnashing of teeth." So, like you're saying, it's more or less, kind of like when Jonathan preached on integrity. You know, we should be working for God no matter, every day of our life. Not saying, well, it looks like on the TV, we got about 10 years before Jesus comes back. So I'm gonna play around for about 7 of those years and then get right again, you know? No, you shouldn't think like that. You don't know when he's coming back.
Yeah, I was thinking of the people in the New Testament and stuff. If they realized that it was going to be over 2,000 years before Christ comes again, you know, to them, this is urgent. You know, they didn't know. They thought it was tomorrow or next week, so they were always being prepared for that. It's a very good point. Do you think not knowing when Christ will come again, how do you think that affects us? I think Michael hit on the thing, you know. We may think we got a lot of time, don't we? We don't need to be, you know, have that as our top priority right now, or something like that.
I think too, it's saying youth is wasted on the young, right? I was talking with Jason and I yesterday were talking about something. I can't remember the context of it, but I brought up death again with a 7-year-old, probably a weird topic to be having conversation, but he made the comment to me. I said something about dying or we could die from this or something. He said, "I'm never going to die." Right? And so, you know, we had a long conversation about that, but I think that as we get older, that concept of mortality and things like that definitely drift into a much finer focus
Absolutely.
for us, and that concept of when Christ will come again. I wish that I would have said that in my 20s I was much more focused on serving God and had a clear understanding and focus in my life on serving Him, but I didn't. And I think that the older that I've gotten, that the mortality, the focus on understanding that He is coming again and what that truly means is definitely a motivating factor.
Absolutely. You know, the older I get, the more I realize that, you know, I don't have that many more years left, and I want to focus on making sure that, you know, we focus on serving Christ and doing the right thing. Very good point. And when I was in my 20s, I was like that. I had, I was living forever, and I was having an idea there. Okay, so we go back to lesson 23, Wednesday night.